To order. Calling the January 9th, 2023 City Council Successor Agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting. Can you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda from any of the fellow council members? Okay. Jeff Howitt from staff?
Nothing from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. We'll move on to council communications and announcements. Anything from my colleagues? Council communications. Okay. Vice Mayor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't usually comment on Silicon Valley Clean Water meetings. For those of you who don't understand or not familiar with that term, it's basically the sewer board. But I think it's important because we just went through some pretty heavy storms. And I asked the district manager how the system held up due to all the rains, because a lot of water washes into the sewer system, and they were able to handle it. They handled over 70 million gallons a day of not only wastewater, but stormwater. There's also a new 16-foot diameter line that's being put in. I had the opportunity to walk through it last year. It's still under construction, so there's nothing in it. But what I learned today was that I forget what it's called. It's just a main discharge pipeline that goes all the way from the facility clear across the freeway, and it handles all the waste from Belmont and San Carlos. And that is going to eliminate 2 pump stations, and pump stations are what cause problems in storms. So not having them is going to be a big deal. It's a $582 million project. It's probably going to be done sometime next year. So anyway, I wanted to report that out. Really get a lot of exciting and interesting things out of the Silicon Valley Clean Water, but maybe I've been on the board long enough that I find that kind of stuff exciting. So anyway, that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Mayor Collins. Anyone else? No? Okay. I have 2 quick things I want to just mention. First, I know we're going to get a presentation from Public Works and from some of the other departments on the storm, but I just wanted to offer my sincere thanks to the Public Works Department and all city staff. I stopped by to drop donuts off, and there was someone from Park and Rec loading sandbags. So it was a complete team effort, and certainly appreciate it. I received so many comments from residents about how everyone pitched in and worked together on this, and really a great work, and congratulations for really coming together, and thank you so much. I know there's more to come, and we certainly appreciate all the work that you did. And then I want to mention one other thing that I'm not going to do today, but we'll sort of plan on. One of the things that I'd like to do as mayor is once a month recognize a community volunteer with the city coin, and to be able to recognize them. So the second meeting of the month, I'll be planning to do that. And I would certainly welcome feedback from the community, from fellow council members, anyone, any suggestions. So certainly feel free to email me, call me, put a note on Facebook, whatever it is, and let me know if you have people who you think would be worthy of recognition within the community. With that, I will move to public comment. This is persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. If there are more than 5 individuals wishing to speak during public comment, the mayor may choose to allow the first 5 speakers to speak during this time, and the balance of the public comment speakers will be called upon at the end of the meeting. You can see online, there is the information to call in, either through Zoom or to call. Crystal, are there any comments, public comments online?
There are no hands online, and I have not received any speaker slips in the chambers.
Okay, thank you. And then, so now let's move on to item 6, consent calendar. Does anyone of my colleagues wish to pull any item from the consent calendar? Okay, how about any members of the public like to pull an item from the consent calendar? Okay, if not, take a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve City Council consent calendar items A through H.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Crystal, can you call the roll?
Okay. Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Venkatesh?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Collins?
Yes.
And Mayor Rapp?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 7, reports to council. These are reports on updates from key city projects by city staff and city council subcommittees. They're informational in nature, and no action will be taken on these items at this meeting. The first item, 7A, is to receive a verbal update on the recent storms, and I think there's multiple people doing that.
There are, Mr. Mayor, and I'll start the introductions and this item off. Jeff Maltby, City Manager, before we hear from Dave Pucci, our Fire Chief. I, too, would like to pass along my thanks to all our staff, not just the folks in the room, but pretty much all the folks in the room have played a large part in that, and the folks working with and for them as well. It's a great opportunity to sort of touch on my Citizens Academy speech when I ask everybody from the public, what they consider to be public safety in our community, and everybody raises their hand and says police and fire, which of course is true, but they're missing a critical component to that when they say just police and fire, and that, of course, is public works, in particular our corporation yard and the folks out there, but as well as our public works inspectors and our building inspectors play a role in public safety as well. And we got to see that here today in terms of the stormwater management. Our preparation for storms didn't start 10 days ago when the heavy rain started. They started months ago during the warm weather. We could get access to all our storm drains and culverts and creeks in the city, and we began cleaning out debris. Obviously, we had a lot of rain on New Year's Eve, and it was really the first really significant storm we've had in a number of years, and as a result had a lot of land movement as well as debris flowing downstream. The other thing I think that you'll hear tonight from the staff that's important to keep in mind is the storm drain system that serves San Carlos is not only, includes not just our jurisdiction. The creeks in many instances are multi-jurisdictional, including our neighbors, Redwood City, Belmont, the county. Our storm drain systems include all of the above, and the state of California in terms of the lines, El Camino Real, the lines that go under Highway 101 out to the bay. We have our partners at Silicon Valley Clean Water and the folks that manage the bay itself. And all these entities come together every year to help prepare for wet weather, winter storms, and the type of flooding that we've seen here. And I know a lot of folks in town haven't seen this flooding before, but if you've lived here before, this is probably about the 10th time I've seen this level of flooding in the last 20 years, though it's been a number of years, but in the early 00s, it was fairly common occurrence. And even in some parts of the city, it was even heavier in terms of the flooding because we've done a number of projects over the years. We continue to improve and make investments in our stormwater system throughout the community. We'll continue to have projects in future budgets to make improvements as well. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave to begin our presentation.
Great, thanks very much. Mayor Eck, council members, Dave Pucci, Deputy Fire Chief with the Redwood City Fire Department, and I'm going to give you kind of an overview of how we coordinated the city response to the storms, effect on fire, and then you're going to hear from other department heads on how we coordinated and responded to these flooding situations and everything else that we had. So really, this started off on New Year's Eve, and it started the day before also with some heavy rains. And in response to the weather predictions that we had, the fire department was in close coordination with the County Emergency Operations Center and the National Weather Service, and we were receiving briefings on what the predicted rainfall was going to be in particular the winds. Winds are damaging, and historically in San Mateo County, the types of disasters that cause the most injuries and fatalities for San Mateo County are winter storms. So we took it very seriously, and we staffed up on New Year's Eve, and we opened up what's called a Department Operations Center, which is it's command staff from the fire department at Station 9 and the dispatch center working together with OES, or DEM, excuse me, at the county level. And what we did is we go into what's called high call volume mode. So when we are receiving a great deal of calls for service that typically happens during winter storms, we will switch into that mode. And what that does is, for certain types of responses, we won't send 3 engines to an alarm. We'll only send 1 because we end up getting a lot of false alarms because of the weather. We reduce those responses and do a lot of single engine responses to keep resources available. We also put our squad in service, anticipating high winds were going to cause down power lines and down trees, and we want to be able to use the squad so we could free up our fire engine for other calls. And so when we did that, what happens in dispatch is that they receive a non-emergent call, something like a tree down or flooding conditions, something that does not require a licensed siren fire department vehicle to go to. Dispatch will contact us, and they will say, here, we have a reported tree down at such and such location or flooding conditions, and they call us and they let us know. By this point, we're already in contact with Public Works from both cities, and we take that call from dispatch, and they just basically turf it off to us. They don't have to worry about it again. And we can dispatch an alternate type of response to be able to take care of that tree down, whether it's somebody from Parks to just control traffic in the area, to Public Works to actually remove it from the roadway, that kind of thing. So it falls on us to actually prioritize that. And to give you some context of what happened on New Year's Eve, on average, for both cities, Redwood City and San Carlos, on average, we get about 37 calls per day. On New Year's Eve, we received 232. And so we were well beyond what our normal response capabilities were, and we needed to do non-traditional response. As a result of that, knowing that, realize, and also just to point out, on New Year's Eve, San Carlos accounted for the majority of the non-emergent calls that involved trees down and flooding conditions. So specific to San Carlos, we had 55 calls that we took out of the system and did alternate responses to, and in Redwood City we had 27. So San Carlos actually got hit significantly harder than Redwood City did on that particular night. As a result of that, talked to both city managers, and one of our future ideas when it comes to emergency management involves the 2 cities working very closely together. And when we are we're rewriting our emergency operations plan so they mirror each other because the cities work so closely together, that we decided to do 1 emergency operations center activation. And what we did is we combined the city staff from Redwood City and from San Carlos, as well as pool all of our resources together to be able to coordinate with both cities. So if San Carlos ran out of Public Works folks and we had some available in Redwood City, we would use them back and forth as needed. So it gave us a lot more flexibility and a lot more coordination between the 2 cities. Going forward, we had daily meetings, which included department head level folks in the Emergency Operations Center for both cities joining 1 meeting. We did it remotely, which actually worked out quite well. And we scheduled the meetings based on the needs of what was going on and what the forecasted weather was. What we found is the coordination actually worked extremely well. We cut our meeting schedule down by half because we didn't have to do them for one city and then go and do them for the other. And we were able to share resources and provide response to both communities very effectively. As the weather forecasts continue to get worse and we continue to staff up on lawn, I'll let the police chief speak about that, but really all departments staffed up and provided resources for any kind of response that we needed to do. And what we found is, as the weather continued to get worse, we didn't see the same spike in calls that we did for that first night. I don't know if it's because whatever was going to fall over happened to fall over the first night because of the winds, but we saw a decrease in the number of calls. But we're still well above our average. So, we were seeing typically about twice as many calls for service as we did. And so we have continued doing that. That worked out very well. And I think that's a really good model for how we're going to manage emergencies in the future. This system is not unlike what we do during the summertime wildland fire season, where we unify a lot of different agencies and share resources back and forth, and it worked out quite well. So we will look to that model as we go forward, whether it's a different kind of emergency or the same. But with that, I wanted to kind of give that up to you and see if you have any questions specific to the fire department before I turn it over to the next department head.
Thank you, Chief Pucci. I'm happy to take questions now. If people have specific questions for the chief. If not, we can do something at the end. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on.
It's going to go to Public Works next.
Thank you, Dave. Stephen Machida, Public Works Director. I guess the first thing I would like to do is wish all City Council members a Happy New Year. I guess I'm here to really discuss kind of the New Year's Eve storms of 2023. But I would like to start off by discussing what the city's overall storm maintenance program is and responsibilities. So the city has approximately 45 miles of storm drain sewer, about 1,400 inlets, as well as 490 manholes. And we also operate 3 storm drain pump stations. I think Council Member Collins actually alluded to the pump stations in his comments. And we own, operate, and maintain these facilities. So some of the storm drain, though, besides going through the pipes and storm drain water system, is also conveyed through our creeks. And some of these creeks, well, the creeks are not actually a part of the city infrastructure, so we don't own or maintain those streets. Those own or maintain those creeks. But to ensure the kind of creek capacity, what we do is we actually conduct an annual creek cleanup to those homeowners that have frontages on the creeks. We usually conduct it in late summer. And this, again, assists the homeowners that they can remove the debris within the creek bed and bring it out into the curb where we actually pick up that debris. The citywide does storm prep, typically about 4 to 6 months ahead of when we need it. So in this case, probably about August that's when we really start, as Jeff had alluded to. And we usually try to finish up the work, storm prep, by August of each year. But we also realize that the leaf drop hasn't really occurred during that time, and it's usually so we actually have to revisit the storm prep probably in late November, early December to actually address a lot of this leaves that might have fallen on the ground and kind of pick those up, and make sure that they don't impact the storm drain system. As I mentioned earlier, the private property owners actually have the responsibilities to secure and protect their properties, especially as it relates to flooding. This includes creek maintenance, if their properties are adjacent to the creeks themselves. And the city, again, to reiterate, does not own or maintain those creek channels. The storm that occurred last week was one of the worst that we have seen. The Belmont Creek, Pulgas Creek, and Cordilleras Creek all spilled their banks. In a normal year, we would see maybe one of the creeks actually reach the top of the banks or perhaps even spill. But certainly we hadn't seen all 3 creeks spill at the same time and for a really long time. The flooding was the result of kind of the rainfall intensity and the duration, along with the high tides in the bay. Once the creek reaches the top of the bank and the storm drains are all full of water, the water really has no place to go other than kind of the low-lying areas or within the streets itself, which we saw on El Camino Real and Industrial. As an example, if you were to look at, let's say, your bathtub, if you were to fill your bathtub, all the way full to the brim, and you were to add one more bucket of water into your bathtub, the bathtub wouldn't contain that water, and it would actually spill onto your floor. Well, the bay in this case was your bathtub, and so that we just couldn't get any more water into the bay itself. So managing stormwater system really is a multi-jurisdictional effort, which includes Caltrans, for El Camino Real, as well as 101, San Mateo County on portions of Old County Road, the cities of Redwood City and Belmont. Together, we actually work together or coordinate together to kind of ensure that the system functions properly. As the city manager alluded to, in many instances like the creeks, portions of the creeks are served like in one city, but in fact, we actually kind of share the conveyance of the creek itself. So, for instance, on Cordelos Creek, we receive water from Redwood City as well as San Carlos, and so we actually have to kind of work together to ensure that the creek flows properly. Again, making sure to although the creek itself is not a city facility. So what really happened last week is, the atmospheric conditions, really did not allow kind of the water, to collect in the creek or actually convey in the creek, and therefore the low areas were flooded. As of yesterday, staff has been working split shift to respond pretty much 24/7 of all the kind of efforts of callouts that we've received. We have actually distributed approximately 8,000 sandbags to the community. And actually, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of my colleagues today in other cities, and we're all kind of experiencing the same conditions along the peninsula, where we're seeing the same problems that San Carlos is seeing, where we have seen local flooding, downed trees, problem issues with some other infrastructure compromise as it relates to storm. We see down signals or streetlights, and basically just inconvenience of the flooding itself. We are currently taking advantage of a lot of the breaks in the rain to kind of do our mop-up. So on Sunday and today, we actually took advantage of doing a lot, but there's still a lot of work to do. And, we certainly anticipate additional rain later in this week. But again, we're making every effort to kind of address a lot of the issues as it stands right now. The typical type of callouts that we have received during the last week is we see a lot of downed trees or branches that have fallen into the streets, landslides and mud-related callouts, debris in the creek, storm drains, as well as streets, and then infrastructure compromises as it relates to kind of failed storm drain systems, creeks, debris in the creeks, sewer system failures, as well as traffic signal light outages or streetlight outages. Of course, we're going to see a lot of flooding callouts as it relates to what we saw from last week, the flooding on El Camino, Old County, Industrial. And then a lot of clogged inlets that we're still kind of addressing. I just wanted to really compliment all the public works staff, maintenance staff who have worked diligently to really kind of address a lot of the problems that we see. Certainly this was not really anticipated. We knew we were going to see the rainfall last week, but we didn't expect it to be, at such an intensity and duration, as well as the high tides that really caused us a lot of inconvenience and some of the damage that we saw last week. So that really concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen? Okay, Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Stephen, for the update, and I, too, congratulate staff on the rather heroic response and the long hours on a holiday weekend, and I think we responded rather well. But I appreciate your comment that this was rather unprecedented. Certainly, that level of water on El Camino in Oak County, I hadn't seen before in my 20 years in town. And I'm just curious, in your mind, how do we transition kind of, the context we have to bring to this, of course, is climate change, right? I mean, this was a confluence of a uniquely intense storm and high tides. Well, climate change, we're going to get more intense storms and the tides are going to continue to rise. And I'm just curious, how do we as a city start thinking, what did we learn here and how do we transition that into kind of our longer term plan? And, what does that even just back of the envelope start to look like? I mean, are there kind of lower hanging modest things we can do to improve this? Or are we looking at, longer term, massive expense on infrastructure to not have standing water on our streets some year?
Well, currently we do have a standing capital improvement program project that we actually do, really kind of address some of the localized flooding, but certainly not kind of address some of the things that we saw, this past week. So what the intent really is, I really need to go back and kind of assess the kind of the overall picture of what actually occurred. This is kind of once, I don't want to say once in a lifetime, but certainly we hadn't seen this type of flooding in such a long time. But really is to make an analysis of, what can be done and what some of them, perhaps some other projects that we might be able to implement. I don't know whether I really have a hard number or a hard dollar figure that I really could give you now, but I think what we will need to do is kind of go back and look at what we can do to kind of maybe, if you will, kind of cherry pick or kind of pick that low-hanging fruit that we can actually do to, identify and improve certain areas. We may not be able to address all the things that we saw last week, certainly like the flooding on El Camino or industrial all at once, but certainly we could kind of make efforts to improve the situation so it'd be less impactful.
Great, I appreciate that. Yeah, just this is very useful data point, of course. So any learnings, if we should capture them as soon as we can before we kind of slip into just thinking that this was a typical. That there was nothing unusual about this event, because sadly, I think we will see more of these more frequently. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Council Member McDowell.
Thank you, Mayor. I too want to echo my sincere appreciation to all of our staff for working long hours and really rising to the occasion for our city. And I want to thank also our community members who spoke up on social media and sent emails to thank our staff. We have a lot of unsung heroes here in San Carlos who have worked over the holidays. While many of us were enjoying family time, they were working at all hours. And so I want to thank everyone. Thank you. This builds actually on Councilmember Dugan's question. I was looking at our storm drain master plan, and I think it's dated April of 2017. So, is this something that will be revisited perhaps? And it sounds like you intend to kind of go back and reassess where we need to start spending money this spring in our next budget.
Right. That is something that, we want to assess. I mean, typically master plans, they usually go a little bit longer than the 5 years, but certainly it is something that we do want to kind of assess kind of going forward and see what other projects that could be proposed and implemented, to kind of lessen some of the impacts.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would definitely, when budget time rolls around, I would definitely be interested in figuring out where we can help address some of these concerns that have come up. And then my second question, we received a few emails from the community about Adopt a Drain programs that San Francisco has. I think Burlingame has one. Is that something that staff has considered or would think about going forward to kind of help us maintain, or what is your feeling about that?
That is something that certainly I am more than willing to kind of look at. I mean, that is, I've heard, other cities have been, that their programs have been fairly successful. And it's something that, I probably would want to consider.
And then just for the benefit of the public, could you just let the public know how many Public Works employees we have? Because I feel like it seems like it's a job of like 250 people, but our department is actually much smaller than that.
So our maintenance staff is comprised of about 24 staff members, of which we do have the superintendent here this evening, Lou Duran, who was actually doing kind of instrumental and kind of shepherding and conducting and making sure that we get things addressed as they are. So, but we do have 24 people down at the Maintenance Yards Herd. But as well as, but I also wanted to, and I'd be remiss, is really thank all the other departments who really chipped in. As the mayor had indicated, there were other people from Parks and Rec, from Finance, from City Manager's Office. I mean, everybody chipped in to really help, and that really made a lot of difference, because that way we could focus on the staff could actually focus on actually going out in the field and doing the work, rather than maybe taking phone calls and doing the dispatching. That was immensely helpful, and certainly it was a total team effort, a total city team effort.
As usual. Okay, thanks so much, Stephen.
Sure.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Collins.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to echo my fellow council members. thanks to you and your staff, particularly Lou, who I didn't think would respond to one of my texts to him, but he got back to me right away, and he was on the particular issue I was asking him about. So, everybody was just really right on it. I did have just a couple questions. I was furiously taking notes, so I think I might have missed something. You said we have how many storm drains? I wrote down 45. That seemed low.
45 miles storm drain.
45 miles of.
Yes.
I didn't think 45 storm drains really was correct. And how many sandbags distributed?
About 8,000 were distributed.
8,000. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I did get that right. The other thing that impressed me was in the heart of the storm, because of a particular text I got about a part of town up in up in the hills. I went up to look, and every storm drain was working the way it was supposed to. The problem was there was just too much water. I mean, I would say that of the water that was coming down, probably 85% of it was going into the storm drain very rapidly. The other 15% obviously was overflowing. I don't know how you plan for that. I mean, the last storm I can think of that was of this magnitude was maybe 98 or maybe one in 82. So these things just don't come around very often. But anyway, thanks to you and everyone on the staff for the great work you guys did.
Thank you.
Stephen, thank you for that. I had one question, just on the creek beds, where you mentioned sort of the responsibility of the property owners, and certainly like we assist and do some work around that. How do you manage that when you've got two of the three you mentioned are, sort of border creeks essentially, right? So you've got one on the Belmont line and one on Redwood City line. So, I mean, how does that work? Where's the property lines end? How do you know sort of where the responsibility is, and how does that generally work?
So that is, as you mentioned, it's multi-jurisdictional, and it does take effort, and that's where the kind of coordination really goes a long way as far as making things work. As I mentioned, or as you mentioned, the Cordilleras Creek in Redwood City, as well as Belmont Creek in Belmont. And that's kind of working together, to making sure that, how do we address this, and, if there is an issue as it relates to, but in many instances, what happened in, the storm last week, sometimes you just have to respond because, you may not have time to really decide, well, this really is kind of a Redwood City thing, or this is more of a San Carlos thing. Sometimes if you know that it is going to be a problem, it's better to just address it so it doesn't become a bigger problem down the road. So, and then usually we kind of do a debrief between the cities to kind of ensure, what do we do and how do we make it better next time. So.
Great, thank you. Okay. I don't see any further questions right now, so thank you, Stephen.
I'd like to turn it over to Chief Bell.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council, and City staff. I'm Christina Bell, the Bureau Chief of Police for the city. Over the last 10 days, we have received 57 calls related to the storm, 44 of which were on New Year's Eve, and that did not include the fire calls. Many calls were advisements of flooding throughout the city of San Carlos. On New Year's Eve, both Sergeant Myers and I came into work to support our personnel. We upstaffed that evening and mostly assisted with road closures, rescues from flooded vehicles, and fallen trees. While monitoring the storm throughout the week, we continued to upstaff, so we had more hands to assist with the community. We proactively monitored the creeks, both Belmont Creek and Cordilleras Creek, during our patrols and communicated concerns to our EOC. We worked very closely with Public Works, Fire, and City Manager's Office to ensure the correct messaging was shared with you. We utilized the application Zone Haven to capture the landslides and road closures. I encourage everyone to access this application for the upcoming storms in the next days. If you haven't done so, please sign up for the SMC alerts through our new alert system, Rave. If you were signed up in the old system, all of your information was transferred over. Both of these applications can be found on the city website as well as the county website. As it stands right now, only Dartmouth Avenue near Garden remains closed. The 1 and 200 block of Industrial is being closely monitored and may be closed overnight if conditions worsen. As a precaution, we had this SWAT armored vehicle staged in Redwood City. This vehicle can drive through 3 to 4 feet of standing water and can be used to rescue individuals stuck in their vehicles from the floodwaters. This will remain staged and will be a resource to the city. The Sheriff's Office is committed to your safety, and we ask the community to drive safely and not enter any standing water. Please stay home and avoid unnecessary travel when the conditions are bad. We are proud of the amazing teamwork and collaboration that occurred and continues to occur within all city departments. Be safe and do not hesitate to call the Sheriff's Office if you need assistance. That is all I have. Any questions?
Thank you, Chief Bell. Any questions for Chief Bell? Okay, thank you.
Amy?
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and community. Amy Newby, Parks and Recreation Director. So first I'll start with our program, park, and facility closures. So last week when everything was unfolding and we were determining whether or not to cancel programs or close facilities, I stayed in contact with our other Parks and Recreation Directors in the county. And in all those communications, it became very apparent that most agencies were canceling their programs and closing facilities, which is what we decided to do as well. So I'll summarize what we ended up canceling and closing last week. The Youth Center Winter Break Camp was canceled for Thursday, and participants received a prorated refund for the day. Our ACC meal program was canceled for that day as well. Those that signed up received a refund for their prepaid meal. Both the Youth Center and the Adult Community Center facilities shut down by about 3 or 4 p.m. on Wednesday and were closed on Thursday. After several conversations with Lou Duran, we decided that it was best to close our open space parks and trails at Big Canyon and Eaton Parks due to potential hazards. City staff and contractors continue to work on a few landslides that involve trails at both parks, and these parks will remain closed until further assessment is completed. We closed all fields as well as the dog park. As Captain Bell just mentioned, included in our messaging was also for residents to stay home and stay off the streets and stay safe. In terms of the emergency response, Parks and Recreation staff shifted over to the Corporation Yard to assist with the distribution of sandbags all of last week and through the weekend. I didn't know the count was up to 8,000, so I'll make sure that our staff know. I was afraid at one moment Public Works wasn't going to return our staff because he was doing such a great job over there. And then several other recreation staff waited out the storm on Wednesday night at the youth center, anticipating there may be a need to open the site, open the temporary evacuation site. However, there weren't any residents that reported to the youth center. As I've continued to mention on our DOC calls, we are ready to deploy staff to the youth center to open the temporary evacuation site should that be necessary in the future storms. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions for Amy? Okay,
I'll hand you over to Rebecca.
thank you.
Good evening, Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. So similar to Parks and Recreation, staff from our department also assisted. We went out to the courtyard, answered phones, helped source sandbags, helped source tarps. We just had, and as mentioned earlier, this was totally a team effort throughout the city. So as soon as the initial declaration was declared, we set up a process to begin capturing all of our storm-related costs, including all the staff time associated with the response. Earlier today, President Biden approved the emergency declaration for California, which authorized FEMA to coordinate disaster reliefs and assistance. Also today, we submitted the initial damage estimate, or the IDE report, to the county, which summarized the city's estimated costs or losses to date for our public facilities, totaling approximately $1.4 million. This includes estimated costs for debris removal for the landslides and the downed trees, sandbags, and tarps, emergency crews and contractors who responded to the incident, costs to repair the fire road that was compromised from the landslide, costs to repair leaks in city facilities, and costs to repair damaged storm drains. The county is going to consolidate our information with other agencies in the county and submit one package to the state tomorrow. And based on my conversation with the county earlier today, we should know more next week about what FEMA assistance may be available. For any claims that we receive by private property owners, they'll be forwarded to our third-party claims examiners at Sedgwick for investigation. Each claim is unique, and the examiner will work directly with the claimant to discuss the claim and determine damages. After the investigation is complete, the examiner will provide a recommendation as to the handling of that claim. And additional information on the claims process can be found on our website under the risk management section. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I see first Councilmember McDowell, then Vice Mayor Collins.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. My question is, I read a comment online from a resident saying that they thought FEMA assistance would only start like January 1st or 2nd, that it wouldn't backdate to New Year's Eve and the potential damage that happened then. Have you heard anything about the effective date of FEMA aid?
We had a call with the county, I think it was last Friday, and they did not talk about the effective date at that point. It was Cal OES that we had the call with. So we're anticipating more information once the county submits to the state, and then the state will submit to the feds. So it's kind of a up the chain and then back down the chain to get information.
Okay. I hope that we can push for New Year's Eve flooding. Yeah,
Yes,
if
me
that's
too.
not.
Okay. We're capturing all those costs regardless.
Very
so,
good.
yes.
Yeah, and especially for our residents and business owners too. I think that would be helpful. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Rebecca. A couple of people I've talked to have, they sustained some quite large cleanup costs because of mud and water near the creeks and that sort of thing. In some cases, I assume there may be some property insurance that would cover it, but if it doesn't, would any disaster relief that we receive, either from the county or the state or the federal government, would that help assist commercial property owners, or maybe even private property owners with some storm-related cleanup costs?
So the county is also coordinating with the state, or through the state, with the U.S. Small Business Administration to see what assistance might be available for businesses. And I believe there's a similar program for personal property, but I'm not aware of what that is at this point. We should know more in the next week or so.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. I don't see any other hands raised, so thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members. Niall Blackburn, Assistant City Manager. Communications is a function of the city manager's office. And after our initial outreach to the public, requesting and urging folks to stay at home when possible and to stay off the roads and to check on their more vulnerable neighbors, we really shifted to working on achieving 3 primary goals. The first goal was to ensure that people knew where to call for help. Call 911 for emergencies or any sort of immediate distress, and the Courtyard main line for sewer, flooding, and mudslides. And we always had 1 or 2 staff on hand, or at least somebody ready and on call if necessary through the night to take those calls, and then they were later prioritized by Superintendent Duran. And then later in communications with the county, we learned about the 211 line that was opened, and it was a multilingual 4-language line that offers assistance to folks as well. So that was the first step, making sure people knew where to call. The next goal was to direct individuals to the primary source of information. It didn't make sense for us to be reporting where the road closures were. We relied heavily on Zone Haven, as Captain Bell explained. I know Sergeant Myers was out there, especially on New Year's Eve, tracking closures, entering them into the system, taking them out when they were open again. So we really wanted to direct folks to real-time accurate information, being SMC alerts and Zone Haven in the event of road closures and evacuations. And the third thing we did was we really wanted to ensure that folks had timely, regular updates. It is a typical strategy of ours to use the website as our primary source of information. And we use the other forms of social media to provide little updates along the way and to point back to the website. So what we did on our website was we always had a timestamp. And one of the issues that was constantly in flux was the sandbag issue. We either had sandbags or we had sand. And then thankfully that changed and evolved, and eventually we had both at the same time. So we use the website and social media to provide those updates, facility and program closures and updates. And we will continue to use the website in that way. I understand the county, once we shift to recovery, will be looking at, well, what do we do with all these sandbags now? And I know they're working with their sustainability folks trying to figure out how we collect all of those again. So in addition to those key topics, we created a very simple one-page, single-view website where you didn't have to dig. Everything was right there for you. It was very well curated, and we provided other important links to information like emergency tree removal information, where to check on power outages, road safety information such as 511 for Bay Area traffic, weather updates, and other county and regional sources. And that's our update from communications. We'll continue to keep posting and providing accurate, up-to-date information. Any questions?
Great. Thank you, Niall. I see questions from Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Niall. Not really a question, just an observation. I thought our communication was very good. I saw many of the channels that you guys were pumping out, and I also appreciated the reports Brian put together and sent to council. And did those get distributed as well? Because I know, like, when that report to council comes, it hits like the city email. Did that one get broadly disseminated as well?
No, that was disseminated by Brian, our communications manager, at the direction of our city manager.
Okay.
For you all.
Got it. No, it was a very good report. I hope that it was useful otherwise, putting all that in one place.
Thank you for letting us know.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember McDowell.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to echo Councilmember Dugan's comments that I think the public really appreciated the excellent simplified communications, and it was really helpful in the time of an emergency. So great work. Thank you.
Thank you for saying so.
I also want to echo, I think the communications was great, so thank you. I know we chatted a little bit about it. I thought you guys the whole team did a wonderful job with it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. And I think, Niall, are you the last speaker for this? Okay. So I think we're good. Are there any other general questions now that everyone's gone through from council members for any of the staff that presented? As you can see, it was a team effort since we had so many staff members presenting on things. Did you have something? Go ahead, council member.
Thank you. This actually might be a question for Chris Valley, who hasn't presented. I was just wondering, yeah, that's right. We don't want you to feel left out. I've been seeing a lot of unfortunate impacts on our local businesses, and businesses ripping up their floor coverings and cutting back drywall to, remediate the flooding effects and hopefully discourage mold. And I'm just wondering, from a building inspection process, is there a process for us to inspect buildings that have flooded to make sure that the remediation efforts are adequate?
Well, we'd be providing information to people when they call us for, what resources are available and such. We're kind of still in a little bit of a state of flux, letting the rain settle, so to speak, the dust settle. But to answer your question, yes, we just haven't quite gotten to that point yet with all that's going on. We don't necessarily have the resources to go out to every single business right now, but we have been fielding some calls and some questions from the public, and we've been just providing information at this point.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm just a little concerned if certain landlords choose not to remediate the flooding in a way that adequately, tamps down mold and, is there a role for the city to play to encourage that?
I think there is, yes, and it would be in providing information to the public through our, communication resources and such. And rest assured, we also do get calls from people if they view inadequate action being taken by their landlord. Our code enforcement officer would be out there in a heartbeat. So there are resources out there to address everything you're talking about. We just haven't quite gotten to that point yet with the cleanup phase that's going on right now. So there's kind of a discovery phase of what damage has occurred to this property with regard to water damage and such.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments or questions? I had just two quick questions I just came about, one for Amy and one for Stephen. So Amy, I know you mentioned the open space parks, there's been some damage and you're sort of looking at that, and fields closed. Is there sort of a timeline around the parks in terms of when we might think about those being open? I'm assuming maybe fields first and other things, but, and what is the communication mechanism for that too?
Sure.
To the public?
So let's start with fields. Highlands Synthetic Field reopened on Friday. We had our first night of our flag football league with about 400 kids participating. So that was fine. Our grass fields remain closed. Probably they, by the end of the week, might reopen, but we'll continue to assess that and make sure that enough of the rain has drained in order to play on those grass fields. And then the open space parks, as I mentioned, there's a few landslides in the trails, so we just need to clean those up. Again, Lou has some staff and contractors working on that this week. Our goal is by the end of the week to open those back up again. And we've talked about already, I have foundation members reaching out and wanting to help, and so probably doing like a volunteer day in February or March, weather permitting, to clean up any other excess debris that we can utilize volunteers for. In terms of communication, we use a lot of social media to communicate with the community through Instagram, Facebook. We are in constant communication with Niall and her team to share any message we post. We have a newsletter distribution list for our Parks and Recreation news that goes out to about 4,000 subscribers. And any additional updates we will continue to include in the council newsletter.
Great, thank you. I mean, I know all of it's contingent on the weather and how things go, so, but thank you for the update. And Stephen, just I know that it was mentioned that Dartmouth is the one street that's still closed. I think maybe the chief mentioned that. Do we have any sense about sort of that, where I mean, we had a little bit of a landslide, sort of mudslide into the park. Any update on when that might be reopened?
So what we have is actually we've done a temporary repair fix where we have actually kind of boulders underneath to kind of sustain the road. We currently want to keep that road closed until we can actually assess, what is actually a permanent solution. So I don't really have an answer for you tonight, what we plan to do. But the ultimate goal is to actually get a geotechnical engineer out there, once it kind of dries out a little bit more, to get a better assessment on what the fix would be, and then to repair the road. Then obviously, once that's kind of in place and completed, then we open up the street again. But certainly we would want to do that as quickly as possible. But with the kind of current rain and certainly the forecast, although I understand now it's probably less likely that we're going to have the type of rain that we received was forecast earlier this week. But we want to try to get this thing completed here fairly quickly.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any other questions. And then let's turn to public comment then. And Crystal, if you can put up this information on the screen. And I don't know if you have any public comment.
We don't have any public slips from members in the chambers, but there is one hand up on Zoom.
Okay.
Debbie, if you can go ahead and unmute.
Thank you very much. I made some of these comments last week, but I wanted to reiterate how much we appreciate Public Works in the city. Public Works has had a long-term operation of installing new storm drains on Cordilleras throughout the city, and last year in December finished one on Carmelita. And if it had not been for that storm drain, several of our homes on the very end of the block would have flooded, and it's been working great. So I wanted to let Mr. Machida know that and say thank you so much. But even with that, one of the houses on our block near the intersection of Cordilleras, it did flood, the brand new one. I don't know why it did, because that water didn't make it all the way down. But I did want to say thank you. And with regard to the comment that the city's not responsible for creeks, the city approves multiple alterations that empty water into the creeks. They allow underground basements in the east portion that displaces water. And it just seems unfair to those of us that live along the creek that have no say into water coming into the creek, that we have to upkeep it, especially in light of the geography of San Carlos. On December the 25th, down by the Pulgas pump station, those big pumps that empty out, they were partially submerged. So sometimes the creek just can't handle it because of that. And the Eastside Vision Plan, we asked for Pulgas Creek restoration. Belmont Creek is doing restoration for their creek with money from the county. So could you guys please consider asking the county to help do some restoration? And then finally, one thing I would say too is on Black Mountain, there's a slide there from Alameda. There was a slide at St. Charles, and those underground tunnels, they're planning to backfill them so all that water can come down. It enters into underground pipes that go into undergrounded Britton Creek, and then all of that is going to expel past El Camino on the section of Old County Road. So that will really increase the flood risk. So thank you for thinking about how to help us, because how can we manage the creeks when we don't have any control over what is all being dumped in the creeks? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay.
Thank you. And there are no further hands.
Okay. Thank you. And I assume staff captured some of Debbie's comments on the Alameda piece. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to 7B, receive an update on citywide development project work plans. I think it's Al and team.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm going to start with just a brief overview, kind of a big picture of the department before we talk about the work that we're doing. And since you have received a hard copy of your presentation, we've just made a couple of minor updates. One of our speakers is unavailable this evening, Megan Woolley-Ullsdahl, but Lisa Porras will be covering that section and just some very minor edits to the presentation as we go forward. In terms of community development, what you see on the screen there in the orange is our 4 divisions, and each of the projects that you'll be hearing about tonight, both on the current planning side and the advanced planning side, really touches each of these divisions. So we all work in concert together. Each of these divisions has some responsibility in both the advanced planning and current planning side of things that we do, and it's an ecosystem. And it should be, and it's very collaborative internally and then externally with other departments in the community as well. And that blue circle that you see there, I didn't want to leave that out. We're not going to talk about development services tonight, but when we start with advanced planning, really that's the council developing policy based on your strategic objectives, based on community input. So the policy is developed, and that's how we move forward in terms of how we evaluate these larger development projects and some of the other projects that you'll hear about this evening. And eventually, if we get applications for new development or to make changes to the businesses that we have in our community, what they want to do is they want to end up in that blue circle in development services. That's where really that's our bread and butter operations. That's our daily operations. when people come to City Hall to get a permit, either for your house or your business, new development, you'll come here to Development Services. And so that's the end zone for many of the policies that are developed in advanced planning with our specific plans and our public review through the Planning Commission and City Council. And so we'll talk about these key advanced planning projects. Again, this is kind of the policy level. This is the vision for our community, how we want to look at these projects, make sure that they integrate with our community. And then some of the essential key topics that we have been talking about in the last year or two. I just wanted to touch on a few of these. Biosafety levels, for instance, is something we've been talking a lot about because of the life science activity that we're seeing in the city of San Carlos. Traffic, and we will be bringing something forward to the council very soon in terms of addressing that issue in the community. Traffic and mobility for every project that we look at, we want to make sure that circulation remains workable in our community, that people get to and from mass transit, that pedestrians and bicycles get, we are able to get around in our community in that way. We want to get our bicycle master plan. We want to make sure that those things are built in to these projects as well. In terms of community benefits, these are some things that we're negotiating with some of these large development projects, and we'll talk about which ones they are. We had one come forward before the first of the year. And these are areas where we're asking for benefits above and beyond what these developments are doing on their project sites that will benefit the entire community. And then environmental issues, as we know on the east side in particular, people have been concerned for many years with regard to the legacy of industrial activities over there and cleaning that up. We know that's a council priority. And flooding, I mean, here we are today talking about flooding. How do these projects address flooding in our communities? Now, we're not going to get into the details of all these things yet. We'll do that over time as we come to you with these projects. But I just wanted to keep these ideas top of mind as we move through some of these projects. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Lisa Costa-Sanders. We will be introducing our speakers as we go through the presentation. So Lisa Costa-Sanders is remote this evening. Lisa.
Good evening, thank you. So I'm going to give you an overview of the key development projects, and this map provides a good illustrative of where those are located in our community. We've got some residential projects, new mixed-use developments, as well as commercial developments in the East Side area. Crystal, can you help advance the slides for me?
Lisa, you actually have access to it. Control it from your screen.
Which key would that be? Sorry. It's been a minute.
If you go down to the bottom left and tap one of the arrows, I'm kind of hovering over them if you can see that. There you go.
Okay, maybe I got it. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is the list of the projects that we're going to be giving you an overview for this evening. Okay. Oh. Nope. Sorry, this is not working well for me here.
Okay, I can help you.
Thank you.
We're backing up.
Okay, 808 Alameda would be the first project I wanted to talk about. So that project is proposed with 87 townhome units, 10 of which are proposed as affordable to low income. The applicant has applied for the state density bonus provisions. The draft environmental impact report has been released for a 60-day public review and comment period, and that will be closing on January 30th. During that time, the Planning Commission will review the draft EIR as well as receive public comments, and that's scheduled for January 17th. We anticipate Planning Commission considerations of entitlements in March. City Council consideration is not required on this project unless it is appealed or called up. Next project at 308 Phelps is a proposed new subdivision with 9 new single-family homes and 1 affordable unit. The development will also include 8 new accessory dwelling units. The project also requires a general plan and a zoning map amendment. And then there's a proposed mixed-use development at 1383 Laurel Street. That's located at the northeast corner of Laurel Street and Belmont Avenue, just north of Walgreens. The mixed-use development is proposed with 15 apartment units, including 2 very low-income units. The 888 Branston site is located at the northeast corner of Branston and Industrial Road. The proposed development complies with the heavy industrial zoning designation with a new 105,000 square foot life science research and development building. The draft mitigated negative declaration is currently available for a 30-day public review period, closing tomorrow. We anticipate Planning Commission consideration of entitlements in February. As this project complies with the underlying zoning, City Council review is not required. The 642 Corey Road site is located at the northeast corner of Corey and Old County Road with the Belmont city limits and the Belmont Creek along the northern boundary of the site. The site is located within the Northeast Specific Plan Study Area. However, it is not included in the moratorium as the application materials were deemed complete prior to the effective date of the moratorium. The project includes 2 new 6-story buildings totaling 410,000 square feet of life science research and development office and lab space and a 10-level parking structure. The applicant is requesting plan development zoning designation and plan development plan to exceed the floor area ratio and the height of the underlying zoning. The proposed includes on-site childcare facility and community benefits. The draft mitigated negative declaration was released on November 17th for a 30-day public review period, and we are currently working on response to comments received during that time. We anticipate Planning Commission consideration the end of February and City Council consideration in March. The project at 841 Old County Road is located at the northeast corner of Commercial and Old County Road, and this project includes 2 new buildings, 1 4-story and 1 5-story, totaling 325,000 square feet of life science research and development, office and lab space with below-grade parking. The applicant requests plan development zoning designation and plan development plan to exceed the floor area ratio and the height of the underlying zoning. The applicant proposes a community benefit contribution. The draft mitigated negative declaration is anticipated to be released in early January for a 30-day public review period. We anticipate Planning Commission consideration in early March and City Council consideration in April. Proposed Alexandria campus at 987 Commercial Street is just over 25 acres in area and is bound by Industrial Road, Commercial Street, Old County Road, and Pulgas Creek to the south. The new Life Science Research and Development campus is proposed with 6 new buildings, 3 parking structures, and on-site childcare facility. The applicant proposes to develop the campus in 3 phases over the next 15 years. The applicant requests plan development zoning designation and a plan development plan to exceed the floor area ratio and the height of the underlying zoning. As I indicated, the project does include on-site childcare facility, as well as improvements to Pulgas Creek and other community benefits. The draft EIR is anticipated to be released later this month for public review, with a Planning Commission hearing on that draft EIR in February to receive public comments. We anticipate Planning Commission consideration of the entitlements in May and City Council consideration in June. 501 Industrial Road site is located at the southeast corner of Holly Street and Industrial Road, just north of the Residence Inn and Hotel. The applicant proposes a 6-story hotel with 188 guest rooms and conference room space. The applicant's requesting the plan development zoning and plan development plan to exceed the height of the underlying zoning. The draft EIR is anticipated to be released this month for public review, with the Planning Commission hearing to receive comments at the end of January. We anticipate Planning Commission consideration in April and City Council consideration in May. And finally, the 789 Old County Road site is at the northeast corner of Branston and Old County Road. And this project includes one 4-story building and one 6-story building, totaling just over 335,000 square feet of life science research and development office and lab space with below and at-grade parking. The applicant's requesting plan development zoning, plan development plan to exceed the floor area ratio and height of the underlying zoning. And this project was recently submitted and is still under review. I will now turn it over to Adam Aronson. Thank you. Sorry, Rucha.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Rucha, Senior Planner at the Planning Division. I will be providing you an overview of the Objective Design Standards Project, or ODS, or the ODDS project as we normally call it. The ODDS project goal is to develop user-friendly, quantifiable development standards for all future qualifying residential projects. This would include mixed-use, multifamily, and single-family residential projects. This project, the ODDS project kicked off in March 2022. By far, the city, with assistance from the consultant team at MIG, have conducted 2 stakeholder meetings, 2 community workshops, and 1 joint study session with the RDRC and Planning Commission. Currently, as of January 2023, staff is working on rolling out a citywide survey, which is anticipated to be rolled out end of January, followed by a study session with the Planning Commission, which will be followed by a community workshop where we will be reviewing the draft objective design standards and with anticipated adoption in fall 2023. Important to note, lastly, that the objective standards prepared through this project will also be applicable to all SB9 projects. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be handing it over to Adam for the next project.
Thank you, Rucha. Adam Aronson, I'm the city's Economic Development Housing Manager. And so on the slides, you will see the 1232 Cherry Street Affordable Housing Project. On the left, you can see the existing conditions of the site. The area outlined in red is owned by HIP Housing, and the area outlined in yellow is owned by the city. And then in the orange, you can see the existing alleyway that runs between Walnut and Laurel Streets. On the right, in the yellow, you'll see the planned site for the new project, and then you can see that the alleyway will be straightened out between Walnut and Laurel Streets. This is the latest design and view from Cherry Street for the project. You'll see that the proposed unit mix is 33 total units with 15 one-bedrooms, 9 two-bedrooms, and 9 three-bedroom units, so intended to be more of a family-oriented, larger unit project. And then this slide shows just a few additional renderings. On the left, you can see the solar panels on top of the building. And then on the right, you'll see that there is intended to be a playground and gathering space for the residents located on the podium level of the building. And then this just shows the project from the street level view. We are maximizing the use of the site to get as many units as possible, but there does appear to be just enough room for a few street trees to be added as well. And then on this slide, on the left, you can see the ground floor layout of the building. The parking will be on the first level, and it will include parking lifts similar to what's at 817 Walnut Street. And on the right, you can see the second floor, and this is where the units for the residents will begin. The 2 and 3 bedroom units are primarily located in the corners of the building, with the 1 bedroom units in between. And then you'll see that there is a gathering community space in the middle with a kitchen, and also there's a laundry space nearby, and then you'll see that courtyard and playground area just outside. With regards to the timeline for this project, we are currently in the midst of developing the disposition, development, and loan agreement for the project. We anticipate bringing this to you at the second meeting in February for your review. And then after that, we'll be moving forward with some tax credit funding applications. We're pursuing the 9% funding applications. And the project will be moving forward with potential relocation starting in November, and then possible construction soon thereafter. And then while we're here, we also wanted to mention the notice of funding availability that is currently available. This is an annual project from the city that has been going on for a number of years, whereby the city distributes below market rate housing trust fund monies to provide direct assistance to different affordable housing programs that serve San Carlos community members. This year, there is up to $162,300 available to different organizations. The deadline to submit an application is February 3rd, and in the past, this money has gone towards items like providing repairs and rehabilitation to Royal Oaks, the Cedar Street House, or money towards direct services for homeless prevention and support for families experiencing homelessness. And with that, I'll hand things over to Lisa Porras.
Thank you, Adam. Good evening, Mayor Rack and council members. Nice to see you. Happy New Year. Lisa Porras, Planning Manager for the city's Advanced Planning Division. The Advanced Planning Division has about 5 planning initiatives, and I will be going over all 5 this evening. But at the forefront of our work is the Advanced Planning Division's work on the Focus General Plan Update. So this project is based upon the City Council's strategic objective to meet our housing needs at all income levels for both our current and future residents, and also based upon the state's requirement to update both the housing element and the city's safety element. So this has been a multi-year effort that staff has been working on since November of 2020. And with respect to housing, the objective is to plan for at least 2,735 new units, which is our regional housing needs allocation and Bay Area obligation. And we recently reached a milestone just 1 week ago, last Monday, when the Planning and Transportation Commission recommended that the City Council approve this project on January 3rd. Associated work with the Focus General Plan Update also includes updates to the land use element for consistency with the housing element, and minor updates to the city's circulation, noise, and environmental management elements. And in addition to that, we are taking forward a package that includes updates to the city's zoning ordinance. So this is a direct actionable item as an outcome of the housing element to make sure that all of our rules, regulations, and implementing measures are in place when this project does get adopted. And then finally, an environmental impact report was also prepared that assessed all of the environmental impacts for the project. This total package will come forward to the City Council for your consideration on Monday, January 23rd, 2023. And all documents associated with this project are available on the project website, which is sancarlos2040.org, and hard copies have been made available to the council. Please reach out to staff in case you need extra copies or perhaps don't have a copy. So the next project is the Downtown Specific Plan, which is also initiated by the City Council as one of its strategic objectives, which is to work with the community to develop a plan to ensure that the downtown meets the needs of the community and the business operators now and into the future. So this project kicked off in March of last year, and since that time, a Downtown Advisory Committee, or DTAC, was formed and appointed by the City Council and had 3 meetings. In August last year, a community-wide virtual workshop was held and several outreach tools were launched to gather feedback from the community. One of the tools is still up and running on the project website, which is the interactive mapping tool, and that is going to be closing soon on January 15th. And these are all measures to gather community feedback so that we can start to prepare some preliminary concept plans. These concept plans are underway, and we are ready to share them with the DTAC, and then with the larger community at a community workshop, which is scheduled for February 15th. Thereafter, we will be taking forward those preliminary concept plans, combined with all of the public feedback that we've received, and share that with the Planning and Transportation Commission, and follow that up with sharing that with the City Council as well. And then all of this information feedback that we will be getting from both the Planning and Transportation Commission and the City Council will be used to prepare a preferred concept plan that we will again vet with the community and then be bringing back to the City Council. The next project is the Northeast Area Specific Plan, and again, it is a City Council strategic objective that was adopted about a year ago. And the strategic objective is to develop a plan in response to continued development interest in the life sciences and biotechnology sectors, and develop policies and strategies to incorporate housing as part of this new development. So very recently, we kicked off the project in November, just last year, and we anticipate bringing the plan to City Council for consideration and adoption in the year 2024. Our consultant team, Perkins & Will, is currently reviewing existing background data and conditions. As part of our next step, we will be holding stakeholder group meetings next month in February, and then we anticipate our first virtual community workshop in mid to late March of this year. The consultant team will draft proposed preliminary scenarios for community consideration and feedback, and then subsequently we will be sharing these with both the Planning and Transportation Commission and the City Council. In late spring of this year, we're going to be starting another project, and staff will be working on a reset to the city's 2030 general plan, which was adopted in the year 2009. So when this plan was adopted, it included 20-year build-out numbers for both residential and commercial development. And although this plan runs to the year 2030, where we're at right now in year 2023 is nearing build-out 7 years earlier than anticipated. So this is due to our regional housing needs allocation of 2,735 new units, and also in response to the market-driven occurrence of the influx of biotech and life science development in our community, as we just saw in many slides before. So this project will evaluate, assess, and reset the 2030 build-out numbers. Essentially, it's a focused general plan update, really looking just at the build-out. And then last, but certainly not least, is implementation of the city's East Side Innovation District Vision Plan. The current initiatives that we're working on center around two of the big themes from the vision plan. One is open space and environment, and the other is circulation. On the open space and environment side, we are currently looking at initiating some work to develop some guidance for streetscapes within the vision plan district area, and then we'll also be releasing an RFP to do a watershed study on Pulgas Creek, and also be looking at the city's stream development maintenance overlay district, specifically with respect to the setback requirements, development setback requirements from the creek bank. And then on the circulation side, we are going to be updating the city's transportation demand management ordinance consistent with the vision plan, and then looking at ways to develop parking strategies within the district, especially considering all of the parking that is taking place within the district as part of the larger development, and considering some of the local business needs along Terminal and Tanklidge Way, where they're operating, of course, on very large parcels, and it's very hard for them to accommodate parking for their business needs. So this concludes the Community Development Department's presentation. All of the staff that presented here this evening are available to answer questions from the council. And additional staff here tonight is Chris Valley and Andrea Martisic, who can also assist with any questions the council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa and Al and team. Are there any questions from staff? I mean, from staff, from the council. That would be fun to have questions from staff come at us. All right, Councilmember McDowell.
Thank you, Mayor. This question is for Al. You mentioned in your presentation that biosafety levels would be coming back to the council soon. Is that like in the February timeframe, or what are you thinking? And is that an ordinance coming forward, or I don't know if you can give us a little more information.
Well, at this time, we're doing some research, and we're trying to get a real handle on it. We know that we've even been in contact with members of our community that are doing a lot of research as well, and they're informing us. And so we're talking talking to some experts, trying to understand it. I'm thinking the March timeframe, we're going to try and bring a regulatory document to you, probably an ordinance, something like that, to address it. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And not entirely sure who this question's for, but I've been recently approached by several members of our East Side community, and they're very well aware of kind of the historic environmental impacts that have happened on the East Side. And their question to me that I really don't have a clear understanding of is, with all of this development coming to the East Side, what are we doing as a city to kind of harness that development effort to perhaps even clean up some of the historic pollution that is over there? And I guess, what is our role as a city or our posture as a city? I mean, I see several of these projects are moving forward with a mitigated negative declaration, which I understand that basically just says, this project won't be any worse than what happened here before. Can you just give me kind of an overview of how we think about that, and what does it mean when we give a mitigated negative declaration, and where will that likely leave us on these issues in 20 years or so?
So I guess I'll start with documents and the different kinds of documents, and then move into the, how do we address environmental impacts and mitigate those impacts. So with regard to the type of environmental document that's done for any given project, the way that is determined, the first thing that's done is a thing called an environmental assessment. So it's kind of like you just kind of go out and you look at the site, you look at the history of the site, you do research back into the health and safety, county records, any documentation that's publicly available. And we usually hire experts to assist the city with this. So we get, basically a report is put together based on the knowledge that these experts and staff can put together, and then it's evaluated. Here's the project, here's what we know about the site or the legacy of, and the types of businesses or the types of contamination that's there. How do these two things fit together? And so in doing so, you can then make a determination on what is the most reasonable environmental document to prepare. So that's kind of the step. You don't kind of walk up to a project and go, environmental EIR or NEGDEC, right? So there's a whole lead up to that determination. And they're both very significant documents. And so one of the things that I think that you kind of think is, well, maybe an EIR is the best document to do because it's the most rigorous and the most in-depth document to do. However, negative declarations, when you write them up, they can be just as in-depth as an environmental impact report. Some of the differences in the two documents are you have longer periods of time for public review, where there's certain statutory requirements by state law that are in environmental impact reports that aren't in negative declarations. Typically, negative declarations are more compact, so they're less expensive, but they can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars just for a negative deck. So that's kind of how the determinations are made. The EIR is the most advanced and significant environmental document you can do for a project. Some developers, even though they could do a negative declaration, I'll be done in a moment, they could do a negative deck, they choose to do an environmental impact report. And the reason for that is historically in the state of California being the most rigorous environmental review state in the country probably, they want to protect themselves from litigation. So sometimes, and in either case, the public is available to review both documents and make comments. So hopefully that's kind of a quick primer on it. I'm happy to answer any more questions about the process. So how do we look at each of these projects individually? I kind of touched on it in the environmental assessment part of the review. We look at documents, we look at the businesses that were there, we talk to the county health, and there's several environmental regulatory groups. There's the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, that people have heard about. There's another one that's very prominent. It's called the Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTSC. And these are all agencies that work together, and they sometimes make the determination on who is better to oversee these things. So a lot of times what we find with these projects that have legacy contamination is that there's already some kind of a regulatory process in place through one of these big regulatory agencies. We document that. Some of our residents are very familiar with that, and they look at these. They're all publicly available documents through the county, and so you can look at these things. And so that's kind of what we start with. What's there? What do we know? For each of these environmental documents, we require that the developers, the property owners, submit these studies to the city, and there's different phases. There's phase 1, and then there's phase 2 where you drill into the, deeper into the ground. Phase 1, you look at historical documents, you can do some drilling. Phase 2 is much more in-depth where you drill deeper and do chemical analysis and things. And so we do require that they submit all these documents to the city as part of the review process. And then we look at what the regulatory agencies are that are already involved. In some cases, the cities don't have a lot of regulatory authority in terms of pushing a property owner, developer, former business owner to do certain things, because that's just how the law is. The Environmental Protection Agency has jurisdiction. And we can talk to them, we can work with them, but there's only so much a city can do. So I think in terms of what San Carlos is doing, we do a very rigorous review. We make sure that we understand who's in charge of the regulatory process, and we work with our community to make sure that these things are done correctly in the development process.
Yeah, thank you, Al. That very good overview of that, and educational for me, so thank you. I guess then, like these projects here that, we just got a quick overview of, are there any recent examples of where significant issues were discovered and were they remediated? Or, I don't have any personal, I haven't received any reporting on, has there been any cleanup or, have there been significant issues that have been involved in any of these projects?
I can point to a couple of projects in our community that are built. And one is the project in the 800 block of industrial, and that's the current Alexandria project along the 101 freeway. And there was contamination that was discovered on that site. And what they did is they were going to dig down anyway to do a parking structure underground and everything. And when they started digging, they discovered that it was fairly significant contamination at that site, and they dug it out. And it was incredibly challenging and expensive, but they did remediate all the contaminated dirt at that site. Another was the Palo Alto Medical Foundation project, which was another old industrial site, and that was also a lot of earth was removed from that site. And a lot of times what happens is they'll bring in clean earth to replace the earth if they need to. Or in some cases, depending on the type of the project, they will put a barrier in the ground or, for instance, around the site so that it's a barrier to any potential other things that could come up through the earth in the future. So those are just a couple of the sites. There's more, but I just wanted to highlight a couple that were done.
Yeah, no, that was very useful. I appreciate that. And is that those are generally the state, once it's been discovered, then I'm assuming one of those state agencies then runs that process and overview and provides the oversight on the cleanup and the final sign off.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Al.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. I don't see any other lights, but I did have a couple of questions. I wanted to first follow up on Councilmember McDowell's question about the biosafety levels, Al, if I can. So I think part of this was sort of brought up because of I think it's the 642 Quarry project. There was a request for biosafety level 3 potentially as part of that process. So I know you're talking about sort of March timeline. How does that all, the timing all work on that if we were to sort of to look at this and decide to not permit anything, or I should say only permit levels 1 and 2 in San Carlos?
We've been in contact with all the developers in the community, so I think they're all the developments that are coming forward, they're aware that the city is considering only allowing for biosafety levels 1 and 2. So they're all aware that this will be an issue that will be discussed by the city council in the near future. And so, there's been different reactions to it, but at this point, it's not a deal killer in my view.
Okay, and can you just remind me then the timing of the 642? Because I guess my other question was sort of follow up on timing of that. So when is that project slated to come forward? I'm assuming we would want to deal with the biosafety levels before this project was brought up to planning and to the council.
You can do it that way, and I'm going to ask Lisa Costa Sanders to answer that question. But before she does, there's a couple of ways to approach it. One, you could do an ordinance to say it at any time, but you can also condition each of these projects to only be for biosafety levels 1 and 2, if that's what your desire is. So you can do it as part of their zoning. Each of the project is asking for a plan development. So you can do it that way too. If it gets in the way of some of the timing issues and one of the developers says, hey, look, I got to go now, or they are very, very concerned about it. So I think that either way, it'll work out in terms of timing. But Lisa, do you have the timing for the Quarry project?
Certainly. So we anticipate the quarry going to Planning Commission the end of February and coming before City Council kind of in mid-March. And exactly as Al said, what you're really evaluating with these developments is more the building and the use in general. At a later date, the specific tenant would come in line, and then we would know kind of what type of lab would be involved. And most of these buildings have about a 2-year construction phase. So we won't be seeing the exact tenants for well over a 2-year period.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. That's helpful. I guess I will just sort of offer from my perspective, I would prefer to address this before this gets, before we approved or sort of consider any kind of plan development agreement with this project.
If I can just make one other note on the timing of the biosafety level ordinance, we do need to go to Planning Commission if it's going to be an ordinance that affects the zoning code amendment before we can come to City Council.
Understood. Okay. Thank you. The second question is, I think, a quick one. Lisa, I saw in the 888 Branston, they're asking for a conditional use permit. Could you tell me what that's for?
Certainly. So our code does consider townhome uses to be a single-family residential use, but it requires a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission.
No,
so
I'm sorry. I'm talking about the 888 Branston project. I saw that.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I heard 8. So 888 Branston.
888, not 808.
Yeah. The Branston development, it's for a tower element at the entry to go a little bit taller, and our code doesn't permit that.
Okay, thank you. Then 2 other quick questions. I would just mention on the 1232 Cherry project, is there anything that, and Adam, I don't know if you're the right person to answer this, but I would just ask it. I did get an email from a constituent just asking about sort of I know it's slated for the property we acquired is slated for demolition, but there's graffiti and some other stuff on there. Is there anything that we can do in the meantime to do some maintenance around that so it's not such an eyesore, basically at this point, until we get to that, because we're looking at almost a year till that gets taken down?
Yeah, I can certainly connect with Stephen in Public Works, and we can try and get that taken care of immediately. And then the project is slated for demolition before that year-long timeline, so it shouldn't be up for that long.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then my last question is on the 987 commercial project, the Alexandria project. And then I know it was mentioned it would be coming in 3 phases over 15 years is sort of the plan. And Al, I don't know if it's you, can tell me this. We've obviously got funding from sort of impact fees and then also potentially from a development agreement. When could we, if it's phased 3 ways, assuming, are we looking at doing multiple development agreements that we would then, and how the impact fees, we're waiting 15 years to get the impact fees and the development funds, or is that going to be sort of over time as each sort of piece of the project gets done?
Typically, you do one development agreement, and in that agreement, you can talk about what your expectations are for each of the phases. So you build in both the developer's expectations and the city's expectations. Typically, a lot of the fees are done at permit, issuance or a condition or a certificate of occupancy, so there is timing. So my understanding is that we would get fees as the project kind of goes forward. Cities do I think, ask for fees if they want certain fees for certain things earlier in the process. You can write that into the development agreement. But over time, the economy and the market changes, and those are more difficult to negotiate.
Thank you. That's helpful. I just want to understand how, if we're waiting that much time for certain funding that we might expect if projects are finished or parts of it. And then how does that tie in if we're doing it over 15 years and we've got a time limit requirement rule in place for the city in terms of construction? I mean, if they're doing it 15 years, they're not even close to the time limit that we have for the project. So how does that get addressed in the development agreement? Is that something that potentially is negotiated? How does that happen? And then I'll.
Again, in terms of like when we get certain fees and things like that?
I think we put in last year, a couple years ago, we put in a construction time limit ordinance in place. Obviously, 15 years is way beyond the construction time limit ordinance. So how does that get addressed for that particular project?
So with these projects, because they're really different and special, and so both the developer and the city have some leeway to negotiate time and fees and things like that. And so while you have an ordinance on the books for construction activity, once you get into the development agreement, it's like you can do different things than your ordinances. You can do different things in terms of your heights too, as we've been discussing with you, but also with timing. You can negotiate those things. That you are able to do that. And so our developer will be talking to the city, I'm sure, about different timing of different phases and when they want to do certain things, and we need to look at that too.
Great.
To the mayor, I just took a glance at the ordinance. I think part of it's tied to the building permit. So if they do the phases and they pull permits across the time of the project, the limit will apply to each building permit. That's the way I'm reading that.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
And it's also typical in development agreements to have shot clocks for different phases. If you're phasing things in, you might recall the Palo Alto Medical Foundation included that for their hospital. And we actually had to renegotiate that agreement with them 10 years later, where the city was actually able to procure additional benefits because they didn't build the hospital within that 10-year period, but wanted to extend into the future. So those are likely additional provisions that you might see included to help sort of protect against the unknown of what could happen out there in the future.
Great, thank you. I do see Vice Mayor Collins had his button pushed there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Adam, we all know that the 1232 Cherry Street project, the last time I checked, is 100% affordable project, right? I just didn't see it anywhere listed in the presentation notes, and just for the public benefit, I want to confirm that, that is going to be a 100% affordable project.
That's correct. It'll be 100%, and it'll be at extremely low, very low, and low income levels.
Okay, great. That was my next question, and you answered it. All right. The only other question I have, Al, you mentioned that we could, regarding the biosafety level potential ordinance, I think I brought up a couple months ago about the fact that maybe we should just formalize the process and not permit it by ordinance, anything over biosafety level 2. But you made it was something you said got me to thinking that there was a different way to go about it. And is there something that it's one of those cases where you might be careful what you wish for, and that if we pass an ordinance, is there another way to prevent that? You said something project by project. Would we be possibly doing ourselves a disservice by passing an ordinance that was so restrictive when there might be another option? I mean, I'm still in favor of an ordinance, but I'm getting the feeling that, that might not be the best way. And I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you can, the good news is that even though you're doing an ordinance, you can always build in some flexibility. And what we would do is present some ideas for you in terms of maybe some adjustments or little things that you could do along the way in an ordinance. So, it just depends on how the whole council and how the community wants to approach it. So yes, you could not have an ordinance and just do it individually in these planned development agreements. However, some of the projects that are coming forward don't require these planned development agreements with the city. And so those would then you wouldn't have the ability necessarily to say to those developments that you can't do BSL 3 or 4. An ordinance with an umbrella over the whole community is probably the best way to go if you're going to do it. But within that, again, you have some flexibility to do some things if you think that you want to add in things or subtract, and we'll come to you with more information about that.
Well, that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about it, because I think the public has an expectation that, we're going to eventually, hopefully, we'll agree and pass an ordinance that prohibits that. But, that's, I wanted to know that so that, the public is assured, and we as a council are assured that, we still have the ability to make accommodations for particular projects, even though we might have an ordinance. Okay, thank you.
All right. Oh, that's okay. Councilmember Venkatesh.
Hi. I just wanted to clarify. So you can do an ordinance for...
I lost the last part. I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to clarify. So you can do an ordinance, an umbrella ordinance at a level 2 for all projects?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. So, Crystal, let's move to public comment. Let's start on line first and then see if we have anything in the chambers.
Looks like first up is Debbie. You can go ahead and unmute.
Hi again, this is Debbie Baldacchi. And my first part of my career, I was a registered nurse with a master's degree in nursing. And I was heavily involved in the San Francisco Director of Nurses Infectious Disease Prevention committees. And that's why I'm so concerned about the BSL 3 labs in our area. I'm a member of the Bay Area Biosafety Committee, and we are meeting with, we met with Supervisor Pine, and we're meeting with members of the San Mateo Environmental Health and Safety to discuss the biosafety levels. And I would say it would really make things very simple if the city would limit development to levels 1 and 2, and in the FEMA flood zones, require above grade parking, because that's the biggest problem. If there's a flood and the basements get flooded over there, and you've got a level 3 lab, you have very dangerous airborne pathogens. It'd be very difficult to evacuate lab animals that are invariably on this site. So that would be, a lot of your problems would be solved with community members if you did those two things. Then number 2, I spent a lot of time, over 100 hours, writing the letter of public comments for 642 Quarry so that you could see what the issues are, what other cities do with regard to ordinances. And it's so important you understand the difference between mitigated negative declarations and draft EIRs. The mitigated negative declarations do not give the public time to speak. They're not required to answer our questions, even though they may do it. But a draft EIR gives plenty of opportunities for the public to speak. And when we do and share our experience, for example, like on Black Mountain, we knew there were wetlands on the site, but the initial report said there weren't. So Lisa Costa-Sanders, very great. She took the comments provided by the public and improved the draft EIR in the process. Same with Lisa Porras, very receptive to our comments, and we can provide information from historically living here. And the city staff has just been great. So please give us an opportunity through draft EIRs to comment, because that makes
Debbie, I'm going to need you to wrap up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. And then we have a speaker card from Elizabeth Rossi.
Okay.
Hi, Elizabeth Rossi. I live on the east side, and I have a question. It's probably for you, Adam. It's about housing. I think I'm a little late to the party because I know you've been working on your housing element, but I just retired, so I have time to be here. But when you're talking about the Cherry development, it just occurred to me that do we have any way to match the needs for a size of housing with what we actually approve? And I know when they built the new houses over, the new units over at the train station, when I went in to look at them, they told me that the 3 bedrooms got snapped up immediately, which just makes me wonder if we're building the kind of housing that people need, you know, because I know there's a lot more 1 bedrooms going in. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I guess Adam can follow up with you with some specifics. And congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
Yep.
I wholeheartedly recommend it.
Yep. You can do it after. Oh, all right. I don't see any other hands on that. Okay, so we're done with that. We're on to the last item, new business. Do we want to take a 5-minute break? I'd like to take a 5-minute break. How's that? All right. We'll be back at 8:56. All right. Niall, thanks for staying. Okay, so I think we've got item 8A is the last item, and Jeff is going to run through that with us. And what is the name of that item? Okay, so consideration of making appointments to the City Council subcommittees and ad hoc committees for 2023, and if needed, establishing and appointing representatives to new subcommittees.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Every year we take a look at this after we reorganize the council, and the new mayor and the city manager, myself, send out a request to the full council asking for any potential changes to the roster. This year we have a new council member joining us, so that always results in a rejiggering of responsibilities. we get a list back of requests for either to come off something or to go on to something. We try to weigh those and come up with some balanced workload for you all, as there's a lot of time and hours that get put in by the council serving on these boards, commissions, and committees. Obviously, we're not able to accommodate all the requests. We tried, as we've added, done a good job the last few years of adding alternates to committee assignments and things as people come off of those. If the alternate's interested in moving up, we try to give that some precedence. And then one of the things that we have to look at, particularly in relationship to our internal subcommittees, are any potential Brown Act conflicts that we could be creating. On larger scale issues, we do try oftentimes to go to a couple, sometimes 2 and even 3 subcommittees, though 2 is much more typical in relationship to a project. So we have to make sure that if there's 2 subcommittees that often hear a lot of the same types of projects, that there's not a weird overlap that creates a Brown Act issue. So we've sorted through all that. We've got the recommendations in your packet. I'm not going to run through all of them. I'm sure you've taken a look. Everybody, it's like college, you got to run and see where your name's at, right? But this is your opportunity to, make any additional requests or changes if you see an issue. And then I'd often remind the council that over the course of the year, we recognize that people's lives change, their jobs and responsibilities change. A lot of these outside appointments run on fixed meeting schedules. So if throughout the course of the year things change for you and you can't serve, you could just bring it back up to our attention, and we could make a change in a permanent assignment if it's not working out for you anymore. And then this is also your opportunity to talk about the creation of any new subcommittees that aren't on this list, or the removal of any subcommittees that are, if you're not interested in those assignments continuing, in that work continuing, and we can take note of that and get working on it. So I'm happy to help in your discussion in any way I can, as is, I'm sure, the mayor, and we'll be looking forward to getting to work on all these things.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So as the city manager mentioned, we've got the list. It was in the packet in front of you. I think in general, we tried to accommodate as best we can some of the requests, given that we had some openings with Councilmember Barbara Lohan's departure, and Councilmember Venkatesh is joining us. So did anyone have any questions, concerns with the assignments as are? I know, Ron, you've got a lot because you've taken a few new ones. Make sure, well, you're retired now, so that's good. Okay.
I'm good.
All right, Vice Mayor Collins, thank you. Any other questions, concerns with those assignments? Okay, and then I did want to bring up 2 potential new subcommittees to consider. One, based on some of the stuff that we've done in the past, as under Councilmember McDowell with regards to the Brown Act and things, saying that letter, I wanted to make the recommendation that we consider creating a legislative subcommittee, so that we have an opportunity to look at some issues, maybe work with our lobbyists and city staff ahead of time so we can sort of be a little more proactive on things. And after talking with Jeff about that, part of the suggestion was to have the mayor be one of the members, since there may be a need to sign a letter or do something maybe a little more quickly. We'd have that flexibility if the mayor was part of that, so that sort of as precedent. But then if the council was in agreement, we'd try to create this and look at a second potential, having someone else be a part of that. So I'm happy to take any thoughts around that. Okay. Vice Mayor Collins.
I think it's an excellent idea. I will not offer to be on the subcommittee with you. Nothing personal. I'm a little overcommitted, but I do think it's a good idea.
All right. Thank you, Vice Mayor Collins. Councilmember McDowell.
Thank you, Mayor. I too think it would be a good idea to create this committee. I know that I've worked with you on our Brown Act letter to our state legislators. I'm also working on some housing legislation on the HART board, so I would be interested in joining the subcommittee if no one else is
I would be
interested.
Glad to have you join me. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And sure, I think it's a fine subject for a subcommittee, and I would support Adam and Sarah as the members of such committee.
Okay. I'm assuming we don't, well, we just do that, we'll vote after on that one. And then the second one that we discussed potentially, I think a few months ago, as we kind of were looking at redoing the Trails Master Plan and doing some work around that to potentially create a Trails subcommittee, Trails/open space, however we want to structure it. I know Councilmember Dugan expressed some interest in that area, and as we were kind of going through with updating the plans, I've had some conversations with the city attorney and city manager about some potential opportunities, and so I thought that would be a good thing to vet some of that previously with the subcommittee and then bring it to full council. So I'm open to suggestions if people are interested in that as well, and given that this is one of my priorities for the year, I'm going to take Mario or precedence and put myself on it. So Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, no, I do think how our trails interact and, all the ways our parks can be best used. I know this is a hot topic in Belmont. It's not such a hot topic in San Carlos because I think we have done a good job, but I agree it is something we should continually take a look at. And I'll say I'm a fairly heavy user of our trails and the other trails in the area, so I would be happy to serve on that subcommittee if it made sense.
Awesome. Sounds good. Any concerns or opposition to creating a trails subcommittee? Okay. Awesome. And everyone's comfortable with the existing, with these two additions, the existing subcommittees feel like they're still appropriate to keep working on and for the next year? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. So I think for this one, Krista, is there any public comment?
I don't see any hands in Zoom, and we can give them a few seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I just had a quick question. This came up, I think, in our budgeting last year, just when we think in the context of $35 million towards public works. And maybe this is a question for you first, Jeff. As we think about major new investments in public works and, resiliency to climate change, et cetera, what we've just experienced, is there a subcommittee that really does help Stephen think through prioritization and methodology on allocating that $35 million? And should there be a public works subcommittee, perhaps?
I don't know that particular issue has ever been raised in terms of the specifics of that, but that discussion did take place a number of years ago with the city council around budget and those kinds of things. And the council at the time had settled on the fact that they wanted to all be involved. They felt like the council was the subcommittee, and because we did advanced meetings, strategic plan meetings, study sessions with the council on that, they felt comfortable with that particular approach. I can certainly talk to staff about it, but off the top of my head, I would say that probably the number one reason why you wouldn't need to have a subcommittee is that so much of the public works projects are driven by existing master plans. So the council's already identified the priorities, and it's really more a matter of working through them as funding becomes available. And then, of course, those things are amended over time. So, and it tends to be fairly technical as well.
Okay. Are you, Councilmember Dugan, are you comfortable then if Jeff goes back to staff first and and if there's a recommendation, we can always reopen this and add this afterwards? There's nothing that stops us from doing that.
Yeah, no, I'm comfortable with that. I don't feel there's a burning need. I just, it just flagged for me in the budgetary process that, we're making a major investment in this area. And usually when there's a major initiative, we do tend to have subcommittee coverage. And I don't feel strongly about it. I don't know if any of my colleagues have an opinion about it. I just know that, a lot of that does seem to kind of, we hear about it after the fact, sort of seems to be the posture of Public Works.
Okay. So I think, Jeff, if you're able to check with Stephen and staff and come back with a recommendation, that'd be...
Absolutely.
We're comfortable with that. Okay. And Crystal, is anybody okay? And any final staff, council comments? If not, I'd be happy to call for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the updates to the City Council subcommittees and ad hoc committees for 2023.
And do we need to add those?
Yeah, with the additions of the legislative subcommittee, with the appointment of Adam Rack and Sarah McDowell, and the creation of a Trails and Open Space subcommittee, appointing Adam Rack and John Duggan.
With those provisions, that is my movement.
I'll second.
Okay, Crystal, can you call the roll?
Vice Mayor Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Venkatesh?
Yes.
And Mayor Rack?
Yes. Okay, let's move on. We've got agenda setting, number 9. There was nothing pre-set for that. Anything from my colleagues? Okay, if not, I will adjourn.